So this might be one of the craziest lenses I've ever owned. You like the lens?
I rate it.
Wait, 10 millimeter? No way.
I got it.
How dumb do I look?
You're focused here.
That's crazy.
Is the 10 millimeter too big? Is it too big?
And if you like the intro sequence I just saw, you might already know why. And right now, I'm using the exact same lens, and you might think that it just looks like a normal lens. But what if I told you, from this point of view, I can actually touch the lens right now? Or I can go super duper close. So really quickly, I'll just rattle off everything that makes this lens unique, and I'll go over everything in more detail. So this is Laowa's 10mm f2.8 for full frame. It gives you a 130.4 degree field of view. This is a part of their 0D lineup, which stands for zero distortion. This also allows for a shot at an autofocus lens. We'll get to autofocus performance in a little bit, but their autofocus version is made for Sony E mount and Nikon Z mount. They do have a Canon RF mount and L mount that is only manual focus, but for this review, I'm going to be focusing on the autofocus version because that's what most people will be interested in. This also opens up to f2.8, and it has a 77mm filter thread. So let's talk about why I got this lens. I mainly got this lens for vlogging. Most people will be using like a 16-35 for vlogging. So this is my 17-28. It's not quite 16mm, but it's pretty close. And I'm standing at the exact same length that I was before. So I'm about an arm's length away. But you can see that you lose a lot more field of view. You can still see myself perfectly. It's still wide enough to get my head to my mid body, but you do lose a lot of the background compared to the lens before. And if you put these two side by side, you can definitely see that you get a lot more field of view with the 10mm. So obviously for vlogging, you want to be really wide, but I also found this lens really good for those talking head shots. And I think the reason why is that recently I've been really obsessed with like that really wide look, and it allows me to get shots like this, or this, or this. But getting a cool perspective isn't the only reason why I really like getting a wide look recently. I really think that a wide look makes it a little bit more personable. It makes it a little less professional. I think when you have a lot of bokeh and shallow depth of field, it makes the footage look a little too professional. But for stuff like YouTube or vlogging, I think that a wide look really brings the viewer in a lot more and makes it seem like they're there with you instead of making it look too cinematic. So right now I'm using a really long lens, and while it does look good, if I was to vlog with this lens, you can definitely tell that I'm really far away from the camera. It doesn't look as personable, it doesn't look like you're there with me. And I think that, again, while it does look good, I think every lens has a different purpose and you want to use the right tools for the right situation. And if I was to vlog, this is definitely why I prefer a really wide lens, because then I can make it feel like you as the viewer are there with me, instead of just something like this where it just looks like I'm shooting a commercial. Obviously there is a time and place for both, but this is why I've been really liking the wide look recently. For vlogging, especially for someone like myself who isn't super comfortable vlogging in public yet, I really like that this lens is super small, and it just makes it a little less incognito when I'm out in public. And not only does it make the whole camera package a little bit smaller, it allows me to hold the camera a little bit closer and not have to worry about extending my arm out all the way. I can also keep myself a little bit more incognito, and I'm also not tiring out my arm just because I'm holding my arm out all the way. So if you look here right now, I'm just holding the camera. So this is what it would look like normally when I'm holding the camera out all the way at arm's length, just to get as wide field of view as I can with like a 16-35. So you can see that this is very wide. And if I bring my arm in a lot closer, I'm still getting a really wide look that you would get when your arm is extended with the 16-35. But my arm is basically tucked and I can just keep everything nice and close. So I can still kind of like talk like this. I can be really incognito in public, but you're still able to see myself and all my surroundings. Another really cool thing that you can do is turn on active stabilization. So obviously for like vlogging, you want to be as stable as possible. And active stabilization does crop into your footage a little bit, but because it's so wide, you have so much more room to afford to crop in and still get that extra smooth footage. So we're gonna do a little comparison with the stabilization. So this is just me walking normally, holding my arm out. Again, it is bent just like I showed before, just so that this is how I would normally hold the camera with this lens. And again, this is at the normal stabilization mode, so this is not the active stabilization. And you can see how much jitter there is. Obviously with the really wide lens, you're gonna get a lot less jitter. So already this is looking pretty good. But if I turn on the active stabilization, this is the active stabilization now. I'm not holding the camera particularly any way better. I'm not trying to keep it more stable. I'm holding it the exact same way at the exact same length. But this is just with the active stabilization on. It crops in the footage just a little bit, But again, because it is a wide lens at 10 millimeters, it's cropping in just a little bit and you're barely noticing it. I do think that it does make the footage a little bit more stable. Now, I don't have the A7C II or the ZV-E one to test, but I have seen people use those cameras with this lens with the dynamic active stabilization, and that does crop in a lot more. I believe it was a 1.3 times crop, but that actually makes your footage look super stable. So I think if you have those cameras and you want to use this lens with that and vlog with it and use the dynamic active stabilization, from what I've seen, the footage looks really stable and it's pretty cool. This is pretty much my go-to right now. The other night, I was just walking around with Jaden and we were just shooting a bunch of stuff with this lens.
Hi Jaden, what are you shooting today?
Apparently we're shooting an engagement for some reason. Now today we're running an anamorphic on here and we have a crazy 10 millimeter. You can see me from head to toe. Oh,
I can literally see you head to toe from
now
here.
you can see me head to toe and I'm this close. Boop.
I actually think if you don't care about like having the most versatility, this might actually be a better vlog lens than like a 16-35.
Oh, 100%. Because if you know that you're just gonna be using it at 10 millimeter,
Yeah.
you know that you're not gonna need to change anything.
Yeah.
You already have that low f-stop, and you'll be able to get like some really unique looks.
So like I mentioned, I actually think that the 10 millimeter might be a better vlog lens than like a 16-35. Obviously the 16-35, a lot of people have been using for a really long time and for good reason. 16 millimeters is just wide enough to vlog with, and you can zoom in all the way to 35 if you want to shoot other things. It's a great everyday lens. But I think if you're mainly focused on vlogging, 10 millimeters is really cool. This wide perspective is super unique and I don't even have to stand that far away from the camera. And obviously with this lens also being f2.8, you're still getting a little bit of shallow depth of field, so the background is still a little bit blurry and it'll be really good in low light. One of the downsides that you have to watch out for when you're trying to vlog with this lens is how big your shotgun mic is, because I didn't think I would run into this problem, but it's pretty funny to see. So right now my mic is mounted on the same place I normally would put it. It's just on the angled cold shoe on my smaller cage, and you can see that you can actually see it in the frame, which is pretty funny. But now I moved it to the top of the camera, so right in the middle where the hot shoe is on the camera itself, so not on the cage, and now it doesn't get picked up by the lens. So if you're gonna use this lens for vlogging, you definitely want to keep in mind how big your mic is, because I'm using the Rode Video Mic Go 2. So if you're using a mic that's even longer, you're definitely gonna have trouble keeping it out of frame. Now for the design and build quality. So the Laowa 10mm is a full metal build. It's very light at only 420 grams. It has an autofocus manual focus switch. The focus ring is very smooth. I did wish it had an aperture ring, but if I was gonna make the lens a little bit bigger, then I'd rather just not have an aperture ring and just keep the lens at this size, because like I mentioned, I really like this compact size. And then probably no one really cares, but I really like this kind of metallic slate color that they did for this lens. This lens does bulb out a little bit, but how they made it so small is insane to me, because if you look at something that's not even as wide as this, if you look at the Sony 12-24mm G Master lens, it's also f2.8. It only goes to 12mm at its widest end, and that front element is massive, and it's so big and bulbs out so much that you can't actually put a filter on it. Which leads me to this point right now. So obviously I'm outside, I'm able to put a VND on it, and right now I have the Polar Pro system. I'm just using the 77mm magnetic ring and then putting a VND on it, and you can see that you don't get any vignetting on the sides. Everything looks really clean. So now we have the Polar Pro VND with the mist that's combined into the filter, and you can see that even though those two are like stacked on top of each other, you still get no vignetting on the side, which is really awesome to see, because now I can use a VND and a mist on this lens without any vignetting. However, if you wanted to stack a VND and a separate mist filter on top, this is when you'll start to get vignetting, because you can see that now it's too wide and you'll see both of it in frame. But like I mentioned, if you just want to use this lens with the VND or use the VND with the mist that's combined into one package, then you'll be good to use it without any vignetting. Now a little bit about how the images and the footage looks out of this lens. So again, I don't like to pixel peep, so I'm just gonna talk about it in a real scenario. From what I've seen, everything that I've shot with this lens has been sharp enough for what I need. This lens does have a pretty unique lens flare that I really like. So the autofocus version has 5 aperture blades, and you get a unique sun flare look. But if you were getting the manual focus version, that has 14 blades. Like mentioned before, this is a part of Laowa's 0D lineup, which stands for zero distortion, which is how I can film this talking head part with this lens, and I still look pretty normal. Obviously, it's not going to be a true zero distortion because at 10 millimeters, one of the characteristics of wide lenses is distortion. So you still will get a little bit, and you still have to be careful about putting people on the corner of the images. So right now I'm in the middle and I look pretty normal. If I start walking to the side like this, I'm gonna start to look pretty weird. Or if I walk with my head all the way up or all the way down, I definitely start to look a little bit more weird. So you still want to be careful to keep your subject, especially if it's a person near the middle of the frame. But obviously this is already a lot better than like a fisheye lens I own. So just for comparison, this is an 11mm f2.8, but you get this insane fisheye effect. And obviously if you're comparing these side by side, they're not even close. Like the Laowa 10mm just looks way better. The difference between the distortion is just insane. So again, the images and footage that I get out of this lens looks really awesome. And there's just something super trippy and hyper realistic, but like in a good way, about everything that comes out of this lens, because you're not used to seeing something that's captured out of the camera that's this wide without any distortion. So this lens is definitely like very unique and one of a kind. So if you're looking for like a fun lens, this is definitely one to check out. So this is Laowa's first attempt at an autofocus lens, and I think that for the first shot, it's actually pretty good, but I did find a few quirks about it. So one of the things I noticed with this lens is that sometimes it does have a weird kind of like focus breathing or stuttering effect, and that happens when I'm using just my normal focus settings, and I did have to dial down the sensitivity and the tracking on the setting from my Sony camera just to smooth it out a bit. So here's a little comparison. So this is what it looks like with my normal focus settings. I have autofocus subject shift sensitivity at 4 and the autofocus transition speed at 5. And if I start to move in and out of this frame, you can definitely see that there starts to be a little bit of like stuttering or focus breathing. And if you compare it to where I dialed both of those settings down to 1, which is the most locked on and not sensitive, you can definitely see that it does smooth it out a little bit. I think having autofocus in this kind of lens is obviously really nice because for something so wide, most of the lenses before are usually manual focus. So having something that's autofocus means that you're able to vlog with it, you're able to shoot photos and videos without any problems. Sometimes if the lens is hunting a lot and it's trying to focus on something, I do hear a little bit of motor noise, but it's not a huge deal. I don't think the noise gets captured even when I have a shotgun mic mounted on top of the camera, pointing towards myself. And overall, I give the autofocus a pretty good pass. So right now the Laowa 10mm runs for $800 USD, and I actually think that's a pretty good deal. So obviously you're getting the 10mm wide look, you're getting f2.8 aperture, you're getting autofocus, you're getting zero distortion, all for sub $1,000. I think if you're just looking for a really fun lens, this is definitely one that you're gonna wanna check out. But obviously you wanna think about how you're gonna use it because it is very niche. You're probably not gonna be shooting like a ton of portraits or weddings with it. You're probably not gonna be doing a lot of commercial videos with this lens. But this is just a really fun lens to use. If you're gonna do a lot of vlogging, I think it's perfect for that. It's great for documenting moments because you don't really have to worry about your lens not being wide enough to capture everything, including your subjects and your scene. You kind of just point it at whatever you want and it'll capture everything, which is really awesome. But it's starting to get cold. It was sunny before, but now I'm freezing. So if you're interested in checking out this lens, the link will be in the description below. If this video is helpful, give it a like, subscribe to see more photo and video content, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.